I believe we will be joined today by Allan Mendelowitz, president of the ACTUS Foundation, and Willi Brammertz, founder of Ariadne. Welcome to both of those gentlemen, and thanks for joining. We will explore ACTUS and discuss why it's crucial for the financial industry to adopt this standard. But I would first like to hand it over to Ralf Kubli to talk about Casper's role in supporting the ACTUS standard and address any of the community questions that have come up. So Ralf, thanks again for joining, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Excellent. Yeah, so I'd like to address a few, we have collected, there's a nice list here, we have collected some questions from the community, so I will make a brief statement on ACTUS and why we believe that ACTUS is so important in conjunction with blockchain, and why the Casper Association, when it comes to finance, is quite involved with ACTUS and is also implementing the ACTUS open source standard on the blockchain. So I'll do that first, and then I would comment on a few of the questions here, and I think there's people will ask more questions, right? And then maybe we can address some of those, after we discussed ACTUS as well, if that's okay. So on ACTUS, and I'll repeat some of these points when I hand over to Joe, back to Joe, and then to the ACTUS people. We believe at Casper that it is important that finance is open source, and that the key ingredients of finance are open source, and that specifically financial contracts. So what you're entering also in a DeFi environment, it's still finance. So in a DeFi environment, the items that you're deploying, either your Casper or other chains in DeFi environments, we also believe that those environments also will benefit from the ACTUS standard. So that's why we're engaging broadly with the ACTUS Foundation and also implement certain principles. So we truly believe that what is generally referred to as real-world assets, which we typically think of financial assets, tangible assets, and intangible assets like patents and so on, will in the future live mostly on blockchains. And this is why it is important that the related standards are open source and algorithmic, and that's why Casper is engaged. So maybe what this means concretely, we can talk about afterwards. We will talk about in today's call specifically. I'd like to address a few of the questions that were assembled here by Joe Davies Hodlshark, and that we've seen in the forums here, the retail forum. So first of all, we at the Casper Association, just like many other people, are kind of dismayed at the challenge we have in terms of development and market capitalization. We think that we are developing good technology, and it's quite visible actually now what we are developing. It's more and more exposed. We also think that some people asked questions specifically about Condor and plans for adoption of Condor, and what would happen if Condor doesn't find a lot of followers. So we believe that we're bringing two very critical elements to the play. First is, you may or may not have heard of ODRA, which is really an abstraction layer for smart contract development. It has been developed over the past year. We have alluded to it in a few calls already on the technical side in some of our communications, and it will be rolled out and announced around consensus. So at the end of the month, you will learn a lot more about ODRA and how this could be used and what this means for Casper. So we are quite excited. So on the adoption side, I think we are providing both on the core and on abstraction layer some interesting technology. The other topic is, some of the questions here I see are about adoption and why, what is the association doing in order to drive adoption. So while people may have various opinions, when you look at the kind of environment that was created by what is generally referred to as the CSPR suite and also the Casper wallet, these are environments that actually do not exist on any other chain in this completeness and in this ease of use. So I do appreciate, of course, that there's frustration in the community about market capitalization, our position, and the messaging relative to other chains. But when you look at the substance of what has been provided to developers or people that want to start with Casper and use an infrastructure and, for example, mint NFTs relatively quickly, or manage keys, or manage data, understand what the events are, explore, integrate with an explorer, integrate with fiat on and off ramps, which are available with an SDK. You can integrate fiat on and off ramps in your application that you're building on Casper with just a few clicks. This just doesn't necessarily exist. This does not exist on many other chains. So I think while we understand the bad sentiment, as I said, around the challenges on market capitalization and positioning, that is I would say there is another side to this, which is really nice infrastructure. Then some of the other questions here are communication. So certainly around Condor and also about the feature set that we currently have. We have done a lot of work in the last several weeks and months, actually. I would say 6 to 8 weeks concretely, and about 3 months since we've started. And when Condor will come out and will be communicated, it will be consistent, it will be easy to understand, it will be quite comprehensive, both for a human readable level as well as for developers. So I'm quite excited about that, and I think you can measure us. You can expect a lot, and you can measure us against that in the coming, I would say, 6 to 8 weeks. There should be really nice information available, and I'm happy to answer more questions around that too. Then there were some questions around applications. So as you have seen in the past several months, we have actually had quite a few applications launch, quite a few community-driven applications as well. Shibu, Fatso. There will be some enterprise applications launching. I don't want to disclose what they are, but they will launch this month around tokenization. Also of financial assets and real-world assets will be one project. Then there are some more games coming. So, the games that have launched on Casper, and there's a few more coming, are not just like small gaming, not just small productions. These are real gaming studios that are using the infrastructure of Casper for certain areas. So we're quite excited. And you can, by the way, also see it in the usage of the chain, while still, of course, not huge numbers, and we have by no means maxed out on our capacities. We do track those stats, and we actually occasionally also communicate those stats. So what we will do is and we have done that actually, I think in January and February, we've posted some of these stats directly also into our social media channels. We will do this again once the April stats are clear and people can see what's going on the chain as well in a more comprehensive manner. I'm looking at, there's some questions around being listed on DeFi Llama. So DeFi Llama is kind of a challenge because, the applications themselves that are, providing these DeFi primitives do have to get requested to be listed on DeFi Llama, actually. We've made a few requirements, so I have to check where we stand on that, but I believe that we are going to be mainly Shibu, by the way, made a big push, and I think in context of Shibu and some other projects, we should have more presence on some of these aggregation websites. There's some questions around whether companies are waiting for Condor to be released in order to launch. There's a few companies that run quite relevant infrastructure on testnet, and we expect that after Condor they will move to the mainnet. So to answer that, I also want to address maybe one last question, then we hand over to our guests. There's some questions around us talking negatively about other chains. I am not aware of that, so I'd have to go look into that. Certainly not our goal to talk bad about other projects. So that is not what we typically do. I take the questions around AMAs and so on. We have both a community call every 4 weeks here on Twitter, and then we have a more engaging developer forum, which was quite in depth for the developers about 2 weeks ago. So yeah, so I'm while I appreciate that we can do always more, I would also encourage you to participate in those calls like today, and also on the dev side. So with that, I think, yeah, I'm ready to look at I guess I have to look at okay, I'll see the messages here. Okay, good. I'll see the messages here. So yeah, so I'd hand over to Joe Benzo. And
Excellent.
Thank you, Ralf, for addressing some of those questions. If anybody has any other questions, Ralf's here for the remainder of the call, yes. So feel free to leave them in the call, in the space, sorry, and we'll try to address them, of course. If you have any questions for ACTUS, then let us know, and we'll put forth those questions to ACTUS, and hopefully they can get to those as well. Ralf, if you can, and I'm trying to remember the exact wording, which may prove a little troublesome, but we did have a trending question that I don't believe was included in the list, or maybe I can't see it, but it basically was, what are our thoughts on having Casper listed as in the AI section, on CoinMarketCap and CoinGecko and such?
Into which section? Sorry.
Artificial intelligence.
Yes, I understand that there's opportunity here. Well, we have to say that. I mean, I would say we have some legitimacy, because as opposed to a few other chains, we actually are seriously looking at that space. Now, this is, of course, driven by Casper Labs, which you have seen Renal speak quite eloquently about AI, and also some of the partnerships that they're lining up, and why it is important that blockchains actually secure some of these environments, that you can prove certain facts, that you can manage multi-party access, etc. I think that these are all valid points and quite relevant for the space. So I do believe that we would, of course, earn to be there. So I guess we can check into that. But for sure, when you look at what Casper Labs is aiming for on the AI side and the applications, which they're quite far advanced, I think I would say Casper is one of the chains that are thinking about this probably very deeply, and certainly deeper than other chains.
Thank you, Ralf. Thanks for answering that question as well as the others. I'll pass it over to Joe Benzo to introduce ACTUS.
Great. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Ralf, for that intro. And want to remind everybody, these calls are your opportunity to interact with Casper, the Casper ecosystem project. So this is the time to raise your questions. And thanks for everybody for putting those comments in, questions in, and feel free to raise your hand if you want to get on stage. But we have built up a lot of excitement around the upcoming event in Washington, D.C., where Casper is a sponsor of the ACTUS Conference. And people have been excited to hear directly from Allan Mendelowitz. And we also have Willi Brammertz on the call today. Thank you guys for joining. I'll hand it over to Allan, president of the ACTUS Foundation. Allan, thank you. I'm glad you're able to join today. I know we had a few technical difficulties, but appreciate you joining the call, and we're looking forward to next week's event in DC.
Joe, thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity. For me, this was quite an experience, because it was the first time I've joined a call like this on X, and So it was a steep learning curve to get to this point, but I assume it's working now.
Well,
Anyway,
we're happy to be the first.
You're on. Anyway, thank you. We have a conference coming up in Washington on the 15th of May, which is 1 week from today. It's an all-day conference, and it focuses on applications of the ACTUS algorithmic financial contract standard. The history behind the ACTUS algorithmic financial contract standard actually started out in the 2008 financial collapse. And it was clear that the regulators didn't know what was going on. They didn't know how to respond. They didn't know who was related to who. When financial institutions like Lehman Brothers collapsed, it took the regulators literally years to resolve what was on the balance sheet and who had a claim on which of the assets and who required payments because they had payments due. And so the objective behind the ACTUS standard was to create a standard for granular financial contracts and transactions, positions, however you want to describe it, that would enable a precise understanding of who owed whom what and when, and equip regulators with the ability to conduct forward-looking financial analytics. Much of the data that financial regulators collected was accounting-based. It was static. It was backwards-looking. It enabled you maybe to do a good autopsy when an institution collapsed, but it did very little to give you accurate information going forward. And the interesting thing about this project is that the concepts that we have embodied in the ACTUS standard are built upon the insights that Willi Brammertz developed originally in his doctoral dissertation, and the recognition of the central role that cash flows play in the financial world. So we started out with this objective of creating a granular financial contract standard in the first instance to make a significant transformation in the data that the regulators collect and equip them to do far better analytics and in particular forward-looking analytics. I came to this because my last job in government was as chairman of a federal financial regulatory agency, the Federal Housing Finance Board, which regulated the Federal Home Loan Bank system, which at the time had a combined balance sheet of about $1 trillion. And I learned on the job what the weaknesses were with respect to the data that was being collected and how it would equip regulators with the ability to do their jobs. So in essence, the key issues, the key critical points with respect to the ACTUS standard are that while contracts are written in natural language, at the end of the day, they're just numbers. It's mathematics. You know, what does a financial contract do? At its core, it specifies exactly what one party is going to pay a second party over the life of the contract, what's going to be paid and when it's going to be paid. Now, that's one issue. The fact that it's written in natural language should, raise your interest, primarily because natural language is a very imprecise way to define numerical obligations. And the far better way to represent numerical obligations is algorithmically. And so clearly, if you want to specify a contract for financial obligations, then what you really want is a mathematical representation. Secondly, one of the absolutely essential observations that Willi had that went along with this was the recognition that while there's thousands of different financial contracts and instruments out there, that are made up of some payment obligations, a cash flow exchange definitions, and a whole bunch of legalese and marketing issues. At the end of the day, if what you focus on are the core payment obligations, there's actually less than 36 cash flow patterns that can represent everything that's widely used in the financial world. And secondarily, it could represent almost everything, even outside of the widely used stuff. And so there we have these fundamental ideas. The payment obligations associated with financial contracts should be represented algorithmically. Second, it's not an overwhelming challenge because, in fact, you can create roughly and identify less than 36 cash flow patterns, embody them into the algorithms used to represent the logic of the contracts. And then you can build the ACTUS contract standard, the ACTUS financial contract standard, with a combination of the algorithms on the one hand, and secondly, the data dictionary, where the contract terms that are used with the algorithms to generate the specific payment obligations associated with any individual financial contract. Now, everything up till now that I've talked about has been in the context from our starting point of regulation and improving regulation. But the reality is that everything in finance starts with payment obligations of the granular financial contracts. When I say that, I'm talking about, for example, in the legacy financial world, what are the key functions in the operations of a financial institution? Core processing. Every day, a financial institution has to figure out what it's going to pay and to whom, and what it expects to receive and from whom. Their traders are going to do pre-trade analytics to decide whether, in fact, they should buy or sell the instrument that they're looking at. If you do enterprise risk management, it all starts out with the representation of the balance sheet in a standard like ACTUS, and then subjecting it to different risk scenarios. If you're doing forward business planning, one of the things you're going to look at, in fact, is the cash flow, because that leads into decisions about whether these potential new business opportunities can be profitable and cover the hurdle rate associated with how you deploy your capital. And so all these things. But then not only does it turn out that the ACTUS standard has an important role to play in almost all the activities that take place in a financial institution, the ACTUS standard brings an important contribution to bringing finance to the blockchain and the DeFi world. One of the claims of blockchain is it's immutable, it's perfect, it's transparent. And if you're doing something on the blockchain, you want to ensure that, in fact, how you represent a contract, in fact, supports the benefits associated with the blockchain rather than puts them at risk. And I'm sure everybody knows well the experience of the DAO on Ethereum, where, in fact, something unintended was built into the software of the contract, and the result was draining capital out of the pool, a hard fork on Ethereum, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so if you're going to bring finance to the DeFi world, and when I say finance, this is much different than what blockchains were used for originally. I mean, originally when blockchain and Bitcoin appeared on the scene, they were just a payment system. And payment systems are not finance. Finance involves long-lived multi-payment obligations, anywhere from, relatively short term out to, say, 30 years for a mortgage or 30 years for a long-term bond. And so what you need to think about is, if you're building smart financial contracts, What you want to do is make them the most precise and reliable way of representing the payment obligations that, in fact, minimize the opportunities for errors, whether introduced by fat fingers when putting things into them, or programming that was ambiguous and less than precise. And so this is where the contribution of the ACTUS standard to the DeFi world comes along. And that is the ACTUS standard provides a validated and tested computational core for smart financial contracts. If you introduce a financial contract on the blockchain, tokenization provides a vehicle for assuring ownership. Tokenization can be used to represent, for example, if there's a contract, what the algorithm is in the ACTUS system that will be used for the contract, and what the contract terms are from the ACTUS system. And then you can use the ACTUS algorithms to precisely generate each payment obligations associated with that smart financial contract. And so it turned out something that started out with an objective of improving government regulation turns out to be an alternative that includes something that can dramatically improve the efficiency of existing financial institutions, and in the DeFi world play an important contribution to bringing finance to the DeFi world. And I see on the call here we have Willi is here, who may want to add to what I said. Dan Doney from Securrency and DTCC is here. Dan's going to be on our program next week. And Malini Srinivasan is here. And Malini has a prototype micro-lending system built on using DeFi structures and the ACTUS standard. So we have Willi, who is, I would say, without any understatement, the father of what the ACTUS standard consists of and what we're trying to do. We have Malini, who's using it in a prototype micro-lending system. And we have Dan Doney, who founded Securrency, and which was purchased by DTCC, who uses ACTUS financial contract representation in clearing and settlement systems.
Thank you, Allan. Thank you for that wonderful overview, and looking forward to diving even deeper next week in DC. I know we already do have a number of questions that we'll get to, that Joe, our co-host, will get to. But as you mentioned, Willi, thank you for joining as well. We'd like to hand it over to you and remind listeners and the speakers that you mentioned, Allan, if you want to come up and speak, please request to speak, and we'll bring you up on stage. But I'll hand it over to you, Willi. Thanks for joining.
So thank you, Allan. I think you really made the point. I only want to add regarding the blockchain. You know, if the blockchain does not adopt the ACTUS standard, we could say a standard like ACTUS, but we come back to that. Let's say a standard like ACTUS. If the blockchain will inherit the mess which we have already in the financial world. And the mess we have in the financial world is incredible. It's incredible exactly due to the lack of that standard, because it has been programmed by thousands of programmers, the same thing over and over again in thousands of ways, which makes it absolutely irreconcilable. Now, if we don't have a standard for financial contracts representation on the blockchain, then we don't have thousands representation, we have millions, because everybody can program something like that. And that's almost the doom. It's almost the doom. That means these instruments are totally non-understandable. So therefore, the standard brings a real huge and important value to the blockchain. And in addition, it takes a lot of headaches away. I mean, everybody can program a coin, which adds value. You add and subtract. It's like a current account in banking. Actually, that's even a bit more complicated because it has interest. But so that's pretty easy. But it becomes already more complex if you go into bonds. A simple bond, still simple to program. It has interest payments and all that. Some complexity shows already up, but it becomes more complex when it's variable rate, because it has to call out the rates and interpret that correctly. And it becomes more complex if if it has a cap, a floor, if it's amortizing, if it like an annuity, if it becomes a swap, etc., etc. So complexity is really rising exponentially. So for this reason, ACTUS really takes away a lot of headaches and helps the blockchain not to become a mirror picture, like a horror mirror picture of what we have already in the banking. So that's the thing. Maybe one thing I wanted to add yet, if it comes to the history of ACTUS, it goes back to my PhD thesis, where I analyzed financial analysis. I wondered, what are we analyzing here? And then quickly I came to the idea, to the knowledge that basically we are looking at streams of cash flows, payment streams. So we try to understand these payments, these flows, which go back and forth throughout the world. I remember very well, one morning I awoke and I said, it's the contract. In order to understand the financial flows, we need to understand the contract itself. Because within the contract, all the rules of this exchange of these contracts are embedded. And then I had a lot of exposure because I was working worldwide. I was in Africa, in Asia, in Europe, in the US. And then I saw, look, it might sound so different what these guys are doing here and there. At the end of the day, we are within these 3 dozen patterns, we are doing all the same. We're doing all the same. So that the whole thing, once you focus on cash flows, it becomes much reduced. You can reduce capacity to a complexity to a manageable level. It's not child play. I think we shouldn't put it this way, make it seem that easy, look that easy, but it's doable. It's something where you have to, be decent, work decent, and we will get across. And for you, as you are listening here, the work has been done already. So the work is done. We have created the contract, so it's there to be used.
Willi, thank you so much. I know we will get to a number of questions. I want to bring up a question here based on last year last year we had the sponsored the ACTUS conference, and from then until now on the event next week, what are the main things that you're hoping to get out of not only the event next week, but in general for people to take away about ACTUS and actual adoption for the ACTUS standard?
Actually, we will present many real life cases, which will show how many things you can solve once you have adopted ACTUS. So that will be the main topic of the conference itself. So we will see things like forecasting balance sheets, understanding planning, strategy building and stuff like that as one thing. On the other hand, we will see things from Dan Doney, how that relates to DTCC. It's mainly showing how it really works in practice. It's not the dream. It's not far out, and it really covers a wide variety and very deep finance.
I'd like to add something to that for a second, and that is, that old saw, if a tree falls in the forest and nobody hears it, did it make a sound? We set out to create the ACTUS standard as a public good. And because we viewed it as a public good, we made a decision from day one that it would be open source and it would be royalty free, which means that anyone can use it. Anyone can use it and deploy it in the whatever platforms they're developing. And at the end of the day, you can have the best standard in the world, but if it's not used, it's not really able to make a significant contribution. And so the objective behind this conference really was to highlight some of the specific applications in the real world that are using ACTUS in a way to inspire folks to think about how they can benefit what they're doing. As I like to say, ACTUS will succeed when a lot of people out there independently decide they can make a lot of money using it. So our hope is that people will make a lot of people will make a lot of money using it.
Well,
That's where we're going, and as Willi pointed out, our objective is to highlight some of the real world applications of ACTUS with the intent of stimulating interest in it. Secondly, we'll be announcing a competition where we're going to put out a series of challenges with respect to problems in finance generally, whether in the legacy world or the DeFi world or the digital world, and solicit proposals for applications. And we'll have a financial prize for the submission of the final product that is deemed the best.
So maybe I add a few things here.
Please.
So just for the community to understand, why do we think this is so important? Because we believe that currently DeFi, while important and working, it is quite small in comparison to to normal capital markets, right? To normal markets, and we think this is because the instruments that are currently living in DeFi environments are quite simple. It's typically lending, over collateralized lending. So, you put something in a contract and it's locked, and then you can do something with what you get in exchange. But if the value of your locked item decreases beyond or below a certain point, it basically is redeemed to the you have a margin call in finance, and then the asset is gone. And in the real financial, not in the real financial world, but in large parts of the financial world, it is lending against future cash flows that is really the difference. So you need to understand certain things over time, and that is much more complex than just putting something in escrow or in a multi-sig wallet and tie a certain value and trigger to it. So that's why we believe that the ACTUS standard is so important. And the second area that we believe why blockchains are of course relevant is because, as Willi described and Allan described, the key here is that these are all digits. It's all digital. Finance is purely digital. So anything that needs to be proven, anything that needs to be documented, anything that needs to be held in an account or accounted for, blockchain therefore is ideal to confirm, assure, verify, track, trace what has happened with these digits or with these values, or what is the origin of these values. And this is why for the Casper Association it is important that this open source standard is being used and not just proprietary standards, because it will help enable the entire system. So that was my point I wanted to make. I see some questions here. I answered a few questions. Where is the adoption? Maybe let's talk about adoption. So since the last conference, really you can say, right, so there's a number of regulators that are considering the standard. Now, of course, these are regulators. These are regulators that are, not necessarily interested in crypto, but of course, any financial instrument that lives on a blockchain will also be touched by the regulator, and more enterprises. So there's a few large projects that Willi is working on inside nucleus finance, so to speak. That's that's how Casper goes to market with this idea. That where real financial institutions are going to adopt ACTUS. The challenge here, of course, is it takes a very long time, right? So these are long processes. This may take a year or two until a project advances to a point where it can be talked about and it will be published.
I may add here maybe a specific case which might interest you. There we are in discussion with somebody who is building up a central clearing house for a fintech central clearing house. Central clearing houses are very important because they take away credit risk, which is a huge thing, somebody failing and so on. And it optimizes capital. So they have to be able to calculate value changes because when let's say an interest rate rises, then the value of bonds goes down. So you have to know how much you have to expect of that, because that's the margins which you have to call. People have to deposit margins, security against that. And so you need to calculate that. And having now standardized representation of these financial contracts, which are traded and go through the central counterparty, so then you can do these calculations very easily and with full trust. And so to compare how it is now, let's say, for example, you have an instrument, a financial instrument, say it's a bond. So the first thing you do today, you go to the prospectus, you read a few pages, you get very tired because of a lot of legal jargon you have to go through somewhere, and then you find indication. Here is an indication which is important for the contract to understand that there is one, and you read maybe a half an hour if it's simple, 5 hours if it's more complex. Then you take Excel, you try to model the whole thing. It takes you maybe a day to understand. With that standard, it takes milliseconds. Once it's set up correctly and all that, that's a precondition. But once you have set it up, it basically doesn't take time anymore.
Thank you, Willi. We do have a question here from the community aimed directly at ACTUS. So let me get that question up and see if you guys can take it real quick. So the question is from Lance, listening in on the call. Hello, Lance. Good to see you joining. Thanks for being here. The question is, how long do you think it takes for banks to fully use your service? And how long do you think until we see the first finance contracts on Casper with ACTUS? Thanks.
Who should take that?
Someone.
I do one, and then really you can add. Casper is in discussion. So ACTUS is in discussion. The standard is in discussion to be used as the standard, as the key ingredient for a number of platforms that are going to be living on DLT. Then the question there will become, if the institutions are only using permissioned environments, then obviously there is no value that would accrue to the Casper public chain. But we expect that a number of those environments will actually then use public chains as confirmation anchors. So while we cannot do a prediction, I would say it is possible that some real applications in the coming 12 to 18 months may hash certain states onto a public chain, including Casper's. So that's one answer. The other answer is, we of course hope that like this example of Wieländer, which is building this microfinance platform, that there will be public and open source projects that will actually spin up and use the standard on the Casper chain to build financial applications.
Thank you, Ralf. And while we have you there, yes, let's get this other question. There's another question for ACTUS. Aside from Casper, what other chains are already adopting the ACTUS standard, and what does Nucleus Finance wait to fully launch on Casper? I think that it means, why does Nucleus Finance wait to fully launch on Casper? Maybe
sure.
you
And
can take
maybe
that one as
Willi,
well, Ralf.
Willi, you can comment on the two other chains, you know, where
Yeah.
ACTUS lives.
There is Cardano. They have an ACTUS representation of financial contracts. There are 3 or 4 contracts really even coded in Solidity on Ethereum, and it's actually even used. Although I wouldn't code it within there because it's pretty, I think, expensive and inefficient. You have to do it differently. You have to handle the contract off chain and put states on chain. So there is a block, another chain. There's a few others probably we even don't know. But I think one of the important pushes, and of course that might take a few years, but that will make it really huge, is from regulation itself. So there's a project going on at the ECB, the European Central Bank, where they test ACTUS. And the idea would be for regulators, instead of asking those stupid reports, and we really have to call them stupid, they're really little telling and very expensive to produce. Instead of asking those, they really will ask the financial information in the ACTUS standard, where they can do the stress tests analysis themselves. So of course that would then mean that basically every financial contract is represented already in the ACTUS standard, and that will then be it. But that might probably take 4 or 5 years, maybe more, but that will come.
But what I forgot, and I posted it here in one of the answers in the chat here. So what is public and known is that Crédit Agricole. So Crédit Agricole is one of the very large banks in the world. I mean, they are predominantly in Europe, but it's a very large French bank, and they are active globally. And there is documentation about that as well. Crédit Agricole is seriously considering the ACTUS standard. And actually, we as the Casper associations are involved in a research project with Crédit Agricole to explore how both the standard and the chain can be used in productive environments to achieve certain confirmations, and including zero knowledge proofs, by the way.
No. Having said that, another one comes to my mind. You know, we just have to grab a little bit and pull out the things. Very large German group bank. You know, the mother bank. They will create like a credit marketplace for the member banks. That will be then blockchain related. So that is to plan to be on ACTUS.
ACTUS, yes. And there, whether that's what I alluded to, whether then Casper, this is planned as a permission environment. So then the question will be, in general, of course, what is the use of a public chain and chain infrastructure? But many of those institutions also, verbally at least, or publicly commit to open and public infrastructure. Whether then they implement it, that still remains to be seen.
Thank you, guys. We're just coming up on the hour. The call, the Twitter or X Space lasts just 1 hour. So
There were some more questions here.
I want to hand it over to Allan. Allan, how can the community and folks in general sign up or register for the event next week in Washington, D.C.?
Well, the event is available both in person for on-site participation and for virtual participation through streaming. If you go to the ACTUS website, the easiest way, can we put that into chat here just so folks can get it?
Yeah, we actually have it pinned to the call here,
Okay.
so those of you in the space can find the link to register.
Okay. If you go to the ACTUS website, you will, on the landing page, you have a way of registering for the conference. If you don't know, the ACTUS website is just ACTUS FRF, which stands for ACTUS Financial Research Foundation .org. So if you go to actusfrf.org, you'll come to our landing page and you will have the ability to register there, either for in-person participation or virtual participation.
Thank you very much. So guys, check out the pinned link in this Twitter or X space, and you can register to attend virtually, or if you're lucky enough to be in Washington, DC, perhaps attend the event in person. Ralf wanted more questions. Ralf, I do have more questions. I'm just going to pick one at random. We have a question from F Fantasy. When will Casper reduce transaction fees in order to be more competitive and attractive for new projects? Thanks.
Yes, yeah, I think I saw that. So we are very excited, even though we kind of like promised to ourselves that we don't talk about, some of these functions in Condor until they're really fully explained and publicly available. But we are very excited about what will be introduced in terms of system level contract gas fees, and then also in terms of opportunities for contracts to be organizing their purses and how things are paid and how such fees will be eliminated. So I don't want to say more about that, but that will be evident and well published and well communicated as soon as a little bit more testing on 2.0 on Condor has happened, and then once it's out in the and then will be out in the public. But it's quite we think it's very exciting and quite unique.
For sure. So yeah, we're really heading towards the top of the hour here, but I think we've got time for one more question.
Sure.
Let's have a look here. Any news on CSPR USD going live? I saw a mention about 1st of May, and that's from Captain Casper. Nice name, by the way. Thank you.
I don't know. I sent a response to that as well. So CSPR USD, which is the Sarsen stablecoin, the Sarsen Fund stablecoin, is live on testnet. Sarsen and also the Casper Association want to make sure that everything is well tested, potential integrations are well tested. So we really have to defer to the Sarsen team to make that decision when it would go mainnet. But we're looking forward to that, and the Casper Association is supporting on the technical side, and of course with connections in the community to make it a success.
Thank you, Ralf. So yeah, we're heading towards the end here. So I'll just quickly thank everyone for joining, especially our guests from ACTUS, Allan and Willi, and then I'll hand it over to Joe to wrap up, and also quickly remind everyone that we have a community call in a new format over on Google Meets, and that's in 2 weeks from now. So be sure to look out for more information on that leading up to that event.
And that's a dev focused. So that's a
dev focused. That's right.
Highly dev focused, and but join us. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you've got any technical questions or developer focused questions, that's a great place in 2 weeks on the Google Meets developer focused community call to join and ask those questions. I'll hand it over to you, Joe, to wrap up. And thanks again, everyone, for joining, especially ACTUS. And we'll speak with you soon.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Ralf and Allan and Willi. Really appreciate you guys taking the time to come on here and give the community more information around ACTUS. I know people are excited about the standard. As you said, Allan, if a tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound? We're trying to make the sounds of why it's important to get this standard out into the world, into the real world as an open standard, and we champion those efforts for open standards as well. And it seems like a no-brainer. There's a lot of positive things for the standard to be adopted. We're doing our best to make sure that everybody understands that and all the information gets out there. So thank you for taking your time to be on this call. Looking forward to the event next week, and there'll be much more information about the event coming out following the event. So we'll have some video and also make sure to participate in the live stream when it's available if you're not able to attend. Again, the link to register is here in this space at the top of this space. You can click on that. Tell your friends who are in the DC area. It's also a short hop from the regional areas, New York and wherever they may be, to come and register for the event. Yeah, Allan, Willi, Ralf, I'll let you guys, any last words?
Thank you for letting us inform your team. Yeah.
Thank you, Willi. Allan, and we'll see you in a week's time in DC. And yeah, I want to thank everybody for joining this call. It was an enlightening call, a lot of information here. This call was recorded. We will have a recap of it as a blog post and try to pick out some of the nice short bits of information, making sure that people have a way to make money on ACTUS. I like that value proposition from Allan. So I'm sure that's a good one. So thanks everybody for joining.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.